We hit start videos.
Yep, go ahead.
So we're ready. Good evening, everyone. Welcome to Harvest Lane Honey's first ever Facebook, YouTube, and Instagram live events. We're going to take your questions and go over some of the top questions for beekeeping tonight. Tonight will just be the first of many of the series. We're going to start meeting with you guys once a month and answering your questions about beekeeping. So this is a great forum for people who are existing beekeepers, who are thinking about becoming beekeepers, or just maybe have questions about beekeeping in general. And we'll do our best to answer everything that you present to us, and if not, we'll get back to you later. So we'll go ahead and get started with some of the top questions that we are asked at Harvest Lane Honey. One of the questions we're always asked is, I live in a city and I don't think I have enough space to keep bees. And what we tell people, the answer to this is that you can keep bees in as small a space as you want. You can see beekeepers who keep hives on rooftops in New York, in Chicago. We've actually seen hives at the Music City Center in Tennessee. We have seen hives in the McCormick Center in Chicago. And then also in Salt Lake City, the Salt Lake City County Library, they keep bees up on their roofs as well. So bee space isn't as much of a problem as making sure you're positioned well with your hives. If you can see down here, this is the front entrance of a hive. And bees coming into the hive use that same position. They come in and they go out the same way every single time. So wherever you're facing that hive, that's going to be the main area and activity from the hive. Think of it like an airport. This is the landing strip and this is the arrival strip. And so if you face a position towards, say, your kids' play area, maybe the backyard patio where everybody relaxes on the weekends, then you're going to be interrupted with bees because they're going to naturally go and come as they always do. But if you face that away from where your main activity is and face it towards, say, a fence line or a shed or a building, then that will force the bees to go up and over and fly out away from wherever your activity is. So space is not necessarily a problem. It's always going to be positioning of your hives and then also providing a good water source. And going into the water source, what I would say to that is bees, you'll notice in the summertime, will be gathering around your spigot or over around the kiddie pool or any kind of a water area that is gathering water in your yard. And so to be a good neighbor, we always encourage people to put out a pie tin with rocks in it and put water in it. The bees can suck water from that and be able to get the sustenance that they need. And then also you can put like a 5-gallon bucket with pieces of wood. We have a lot of wood lying around our manufacturing shop, so that's why we will use. And so you can place those around your yard with little pieces of wood that the bees can gather on and be able to get the water that they need without having to become a nuisance on the water spigot or in your neighbor's pool. And so water and spacing is part of the requirements. And so if you can provide those, then you become a good neighbor. So we're going to ask we got some questions coming in from Kim Daniels. So she says, I'm interested in beekeeping, and so what is the minimal equipment that you'll need? That's a great question to ask. That's actually one of our top questions that is asked. You'll see in front of me, this is what they call the start of a hive. All the boxes that continue to add up on this box are called the hive. So every one of them is the hive. And so these are referred to, this is a deep root box, and then you'll also need a telescoping top, and you'll need an inner cover, and then you're going to also need to select a type of feeder. This happens to be an in-hive feeder. And then you'll have, in this one particular, because you've got an in-hive feeder, you'll have 9 frames with foundation in them. And then a bottom board as well. And that's everything that you need to start the hive plus bees. If you purchase one of our backyard beginning beekeeping kits, the item number is WWA-104. That will come with everything you see here, plus a smoker, a hive tool, and an entrance reducer for the front of the hive, as well as a bee brush. So that's all you'll need to start. And as the hive grows, you'll continue, the bees will build out the comb on these frames, and then you'll continue to add boxes as the hive grows. And then the hive can grow as big as you let it actually, before you extract honey. So it depends on a couple of things: how strong the honey flow is, if you've got drought in your area, and just how strong the hive's been. So I've seen these in the first year go from one box like this all the way up to 12 boxes high in a really strong hive, or they can stay into just 1 or 2 boxes, just depending on the year and what's going on. That's all you would need to begin. And then also we would always recommend wearing protective clothing, just because your first year, the bees are great, but sometimes when you get into the hive and you can hear that buzz around you, it becomes kind of an adrenaline rush to you, because you're a little bit nervous, you're used to that, that sound triggering a little bit of fear usually. And so we recommend that you wear protective clothing so that you can check your bees properly without having to worry about being stung, and also that you can give your bees the best care possible. So one of the other questions that I would come into a lot is, where do I put my hive? So if I live in a city and I have a standard city lot where I got a little bit of grass in the backyard and a little bit of play structure, you're going to want to make sure your hive is, I always recommend putting it towards the back of the yard, facing a fence. That way you'll have that flight pattern going up and over the fence line. A southeast face is the proper direction. Or if you live out like where we're at, southeast is actually where our winds come from, so we have to face our hives a little bit differently. So if you've got a wind pattern or weather or something that you're affected by, such as snow or rain that comes in that direction, then you can face it the opposite way of where it's coming, just depending on where you're at. So that's the best way to place it. But people will ask, how do I set my hives? Do I set my hives just on the ground? Do I just leave it on the bottom board? Excuse me. Or do I have to have some kind of a structure that supports it? And so the best answer is that you're going to want to have it at least 12 inches off the ground, and for that it's because the hive will be able to protect itself from predators. In our neighborhood, we got a lot of friendly skunks out there who think of a beehive as a giant buffet, and so they'll come in at night and try to get to our hives and scratch on the front, and we know that they've been there. But this allows the bees to be able to protect themselves against that predator. So depending on the area that you live in and what part of the world that you live in, you're going to want it raised off the ground. You're not going to want rodents in there. Some people do leave them down on the ground, and we've seen that before, but they are more exposed. So definitely something to think about. We actually sell a hive stand that is the proper height to have it raised off. Or we've seen people use cinder blocks with 2x4s, and even just like a bench. So just keeping it off the ground is key, so that the water's not coming in. If you get a lot of groundwater that gathers because of rain or moisture in the area. So the next question I'll move on to is, how much honey will my hive produce? A lot of people want to know, are they going to get honey their first year? And that's kind of a two-part question. We always tell people, your first year, expect that possibly you won't get honey, just because maybe your hive won't do as well, you're a new beekeeper, you just kind of experience it. But more times than not, you actually will. Each hive can produce up to 5 gallons of honey, which honey, actually, it's kind of a funny thing. Honey is denser depending on what they are pollinating. And so if it is spring honey, it's a little bit lighter than fall honey, depending on your area. So it averages about 50 to 60 pounds of honey when you're in a 5-gallon bucket. So that's a great thing. That's one of the great rewards to it. In fact, I was out visiting with some customers here a couple months ago, and they were talking about how they have a boy in their local area who raises money by selling his honey off in the summertime, and he draws in $700 a weekend. And so farmers markets and selling honey locally is a great way to supply your habit. So next year you can afford to get more bees, and you can further your operation. But honey is, everybody loves honey. I've met very few people who actually don't love honey, but raw honey is the absolute best. So one of the other questions we get asked a lot is, I have other animals, and will they bother the bees? And like like I said before, there are certain pests such as skunks and rodents that can bother hives, but as far as livestock, horses and cows, they get a little curious, so we recommend fencing off your hives. They can coexist. We have horses on our property where our hives are kept, and then a lot of the yards where we keep a lot of our hives, we have 195 hives, depending on the day, because hives will fluctuate. And so we keep hives in areas that have livestock such as horses and cattle. And the horses get a little curious, they'll push on it. The cows can smell the honey, so they want a bite of it. So keeping a nice little fence around it will keep it from the hive from being knocked over and destroyed. And then also, as far as, we get a lot of questions about bears. And so if you live in a bear-prone area where you have problems with bears, yes, like Winnie the Pooh, bears love honey. So you will want to consider an electric fence because they will be very drawn to the smell of the honey. So putting it away from anywhere you wouldn't want the bears in if they were to come would be a good place to consider, and then also having bear fencing as well. As far as domestic animals, dogs and cats and chickens and ducks, they do not affect the hives as far as the quality of life for the hive. The dogs learn quickly that they can't roust up the hive too much. I have a beautiful black lab, and then an older black lab the older one, he's never learned his lesson. He still likes to run out there and you'll see him come running, but the younger one, she's learned. But they coexist quite nicely, and my cats, they love the hives. In the wintertime, I actually have a couple of pictures of my cats lying on top of my hive to get the warmth from the hive and to take that in. So they coexist just fine. So another question we get is, I like to garden, and will the bees bother me? And what we tell people is you're going to see bees out there as you're gardening, and that's a great thing, because that's why we want bees, is we all want the food that bees produce, and they help to pollinate so that we can all eat. And so during the high times of noon, the bees are going to be very active and they're going to be out and about. And so we would recommend garden in the morning and garden at dusk. The hives go back the bees go back to their hive to rest for the evening. And so we would encourage you, at high noon, the bees are going to be out and about, and then you'll probably encounter them a little bit frequently, but you can coexist, and your heart rate will really dictate on whether they become more aggressive or not. And so, just go out in the evening or the morning time. And then also, we have another question about how many to start. How many beehives should you start with? There's a lot of information out there that will say 2, and then there's some that don't provide, it's pretty vague. We always say the reason why you would start 2 is this. If one of the hives is struggling and you're needing some of the brood from it to keep another one, to keep that one going, and you've got a second hive that is not struggling and is doing well, you may be able to prolong the life of a struggling hive from taking from the strong hive by having a second hive. So if you have the financial resources that you can start 2 and you have the ability to start 2, we would recommend definitely starting 2. But starting 1 isn't going to be a detriment. It's just having 2 allows you to compare notes, because a lot of people aren't familiar with the hive structure. And so the queen, she is the female of the hive, and she is the one that lays all the baby worker bees, which are also females. And she actually dictates the personality of the hive. So if she's struggling, having a second hive that's a stronger queen would allow your existing hive that's struggling to gain strength from her numbers. And so starting out with 2 is recommended. And then also going over to when do I need to start? So this is a great time to start considering beekeeping right now, and that's where you're going to see a lot of discussion and a lot of posts from us about beekeeping, because right now in the early spring is where bees are really picking up, and it's the birds and the bees in the springtime. And so you get chickens and you get bees, and they all both start about April and May, depending on your climate and where you live in. Some start as early as late March, but April and May is when you would get your hives and get them started and going. If you have existing beekeepers in your area that sell nukes, you can go even as late as June in purchasing a nuke. the earlier you start, the sooner your hive is up and established and going before winter. So if you live in a winter climate, that would be why, even where it's still a little bit cold in April, you want to get it started so your hive has enough time to build up strength before the winter months. So we'll go ahead and go to another question. So we get a lot of questions about using old equipment, and some of the, obviously we're a bee equipment retailer, but there are a lot of studies out there that show that older equipment can hold on to things that the hives have been exposed to, just different sprays and whatever the bees have pollinated or brought back, and over time the equipment ages, the comb darkens, and we have a really good friend who is a beekeeper, and his family's been in the business for 100 years, and he's got some pretty old equipment that's probably, I know it's older than I am. And so we talked with him one season and we said, hey, give it a try, switch out your equipment and just see if it changes how your honey production comes in. And when he made those changes, he did see an increase in honey production, and he did see an increase in hive activity. And so he was actually sold on the fact that we actually recommend replacing it every couple of years. And that's not just because we're a supplier, that's because then that way the bees can rebuild the comb, you can get a clean comb out of it, and then that way it helps preserve the overall health of the hive. But that's not to say these boxes and the frames and foundation and the other parts of the hive will not last for a very long time. Our hives are built here in the United States. We actually build them at our facility out here in Utah, and we have we build all 100% of the hives minus the in-hive feeder, but everything manufactured here in the United States. So that's a bonus for those people who are looking to source locally. Like I said, we run 195 hives, and so and that fluctuates from year to year and during the time of the year, but on average. And so we're beekeepers, and we started in the industry to help other beekeepers. So if you guys have any other questions, these are kind of going to be slower here at the first start of these live videos, but if you've got questions, email them into us, Facebook them into us, and then we can address them on our next topic. And so like I said, we're going to shoot for these about once a month, and so just watch for our next Facebook Live, and we'll catch you next time. Thank you.
You had 9 viewers for this
So we had 9 there. We ended up with the total of like 5 or 6 on Facebook, and then we on YouTube we ended up with 4.
Okay.
So
one. It's getting there. It's
well, you figure we're doing between the 3 formats, and they're all going into it all.
Yeah.
That's good. So no, that's excellent.
No, that's great, because then that way, I mean, this first one, you didn't want to get blasted with a bunch of comments.
No, well, and hers popped up. I'm like, okay, I'll wait for that one. Good.
that's cool.
So we're
Yeah.
gonna post
Cool.
this.
All right.
Done.
Okay.
Here we go. And so the next one I'll do, I'll bring my tripod, I'll bring Shannon's camera in, and we could actually have it set up straight to here. If we're gonna do it outside, we can do it that way. We just tether it straight to my phone or whatever. We can do it. We can do whatever we wanna do.
The next one, I think.
So-
Yeah, we can install some bees and.
Yeah, installing bees. A live video of installing bees would be amazing.
Yeah,
We did
it's not
that
gonna be
TV one
scripted.
time.
It's not gonna be scripted,
Yeah.
so that's why you're gonna be sure to harvest and
That'd be seriously amazing.
harvest.
I won't wear a suit though, because I'm not gonna get stuck. I'll probably be back right here.
I wonder where that came from. I look terrible.
And what I'll do, I'll respond to that lady's question on.
See Mike's card?
Ooh, I want something like that.
No. He regretted it. He said, just put it on there, and we did. And
International Ministry.
he's like, then I was like, you know, these trade shows, and you meet these big professional people, and he's like, oh, that's such a job.
Oh shoot, I'll take something goofy.
Alright, let's head out.
You close that up.
We'll go back. I gotta get that stuff. We'll get the hive tomorrow.
Yeah.
There actually was another question that didn't come through.
Really?
Uh-huh.
thought about it. Next time we go live, when you stop it, it should give, I gotta make sure it's updated. It should be able to give you where you can save the video on Instagram, which I don't know if I can get it back. Oh, yeah, so I got, so what I'll do next time, when we do Instagram, we'll save the video. So if people pull up questions, then I can actually save the video to my phone. I can go back through and cut each question out specifically and make it its own personal post.
Oh, cool.
So then they'll post that, use that for posting.
Cool.
Alright.
Sorry to run, we just.
Oh no, get out of here. Ooh, go get your neighbor. I won't get out of here too. Dude, I'll get up and close this. Don't that one.
Yeah, she just got a hysterectomy, so.
Ooh. Alright. Alright, I'm gonna grab it.
Sorry. We're gonna rush it.
Nope, you're good. I'm gonna grab one of these and give it to the Boy Scouts.
Cool.
They were asking, can you get us some honey? I'll get you some honey.
Yeah, you're like, honey's like a swear word around there.
That's a Cracker Barrel special right there.
Is that what it is?
Yeah, we had a Cracker Barrel, but.
Oh, that's right. You told me about that. Yeah.
Lock this door, baby.
Do we still want to sell these?